Hey everyone, thanks for joining me on my channel again. Today I want to talk a little bit about vibe coding, AI coding, and all of that. So when it comes to AI assisted coding, generally there are two camps of people. There are kind of more product and business oriented people who know a little bit about coding and they're all about vibe coding. They're super excited. They can build apps in days or even hours, just vibe coding, basically asking Cursor to write an app for them and even ship it live. And they run into security issues, performance issues, and so on. And then there's the other camp who's kind of basically anti-AI coding, right? You have people who basically believe in coding as a craft. They want to write all of their code themselves. They don't believe much in AI writing code. They think it'll be wrong. It'll have security issues, it'll have performance issues, and they're not wrong. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how I use AI to write code. So I'm working on ProdShot. It just so happens that in the past few days, I was working on a feature, kind of a big feature. With ProdShot, it's an image generation app, and the feature I'm working on is batch processing, right? So what I need to do is to basically allow you to not just create one image at a time, but you would be able to upload a whole bunch of images at once and have it generate a whole bunch of different product photos at once. So this is kind of like a batch job feature. So this is actually a pretty good time to show you how I use AI coding. Now, the first thing I'll say at a high level here is that I'm going to be the sort of dictator of the system architecture, and I'm going to micromanage my AI to do what I need. So I've been software engineer for like 20 years, and I have a good idea how apps should be built, how web apps should work, how we should have backend, how the database should work. I know about how to scale web app to millions of users, right? And I know about best practices in security. So generally, I have an approach in mind already when I'm about to work on a feature, and I'm basically describing to my AI, to Cursor here, what I want to do. I'm not going to say, hey, I want a batch processing feature in ProdShot, go build it for me. That's not what I'm going to do. So first, in my first prompt for the feature, I'm basically just gonna quickly describe what the app is and what I'm looking to build. So the first paragraph is gonna say, this is the feature at a high level, how it's gonna work. And then let's start with database schema level changes, right? So for example, I need to add a new table. That's gonna be a batch job kind of table, and it's gonna have a relationship with the existing like image generation tables, right? So that's what I do here in the first step. I'm going to describe the new table I want, what the schema should roughly be like, what are some of the columns. And so the whole point here is I want Cursor to automate writing my code for me. I don't want to have to remember like what all the MySQL schema syntax looks like. I have an idea of what the schema should be, what data it should contain, and I just ask it to write all that for me. So you'll see here in the chat response, Cursor pretty much wrote the schemas for me, and it's funny. Like at the end of it, it's immediately going to be like, hey, we're done. Let's work on the backend API server changes. The queue consumer for processing the bash job and updating the front end and all that. It's like, oh, you want me to proceed with any of these? I'm like, no, we need a few more things before we move on to that. Okay, I'm like, okay, oh, we also need a feature to keep all the original file names of the zip file that's being uploaded, right? So we need to add a column for that. And then after that, I'm like, oh yeah, one more thing I forgot. So while actually asking Cursor to build this feature, I'm thinking through all the implications of the feature. I'm like, oh, okay, so in the front end, so we should display some sort of progress of the batch job, right? So we're gonna need to store, hey, how many of the images in the batch job are done already, how many total there are, so we're able to display a progress bar. So like the batch job might take 5 minutes to complete. We wanna show on the UI, hey, we have like 2 images done, 5 images done, 10 images done, and in total we have 20. So we're 50% done, 75% done, and so on. So we need to add that column, and it's gonna do that. And then after all that, finally it's like, are you ready to move on to the next step? I'm like, yeah, okay, this looks good. So let's move on to the queue consumer, where we actually handle the processing of generating the images. So what you probably already noticed by now is I write a lot in my prompts. I write like paragraphs and paragraphs. And this is pretty much just like basically how I talk to a coworker about it and how we want to build a feature. It's not like there's no like magic about the prompting. There's no like magical language or format. It's pretty much how I talk on Slack in a company, pretty much. And you might question, like, I'm writing so much prompts. I'm writing like paragraphs of prompts, right? I'm spending so much time on it. Like, why don't I just write the code myself? Even having written all of these prompts, the time that it would take for me to write the code for all of that is still multiple times more than versus just writing the prompt, right? I would say I'm a pretty fast writer and I'm pretty good at kind of communicating my ideas. Is from basically years of experience working in companies with teams, right? And I've always been a better communicator on Slack and email than in person. So typing my thoughts comes naturally to me. So this is not difficult for me. I would say, if you're not yet comfortable with writing prompts this way, this is something that's worth practicing as we get more and more into AI coding and have AI do more and more work for us. This is definitely worth getting good at. So getting back to the code here, you see next step we're working on is, we'll work on the image processing, the queue processing, right? To actually do the image generation, what we need to do, we'll unzip the file, upload them to S3, and then run the image generation on a model, like on Gemini, and so on, right? And then, it's gonna ask me like, hey, at some point, like, this is done, do you want to test it out? And I'm like, yeah, we'll test it out end to end when we're done with the back end, the queue, the front end. And then, we have a little back and forth here where I ask them questions about like, hey, is this actually a good approach to do it? Are we going to run into issues? So here we see that I'm kind of using my knowledge about web apps and kind of asking questions about things I'm not sure about. So like, hey, are we going to run into body size limits in our post request? So, oh yeah, Fastify has these request limits set up by default. We should change them if we're expecting to, take in a large file as input. So we'll do that. And then, what we should do to handle file, should we use like multi-part like form data? Should we use some other thing, octet stream here, and so on? And I asked you to explain, oh, I'm not familiar with that. Like, what does that do? What are some of the pros and cons? And then at the end, I come to a conclusion we should use multi-part from data. So we'll do that, and then we'll make the changes for it, and then we talk about handling a zip file on the front end. What it implies. Is the dependency going to be large? Is it going to be fast? Is it going to be, is the performance going to be good? And so on. So we talk about that, and then, it gives me some sample code, and then we'll talk about actually implementing it. And then when I get to the front end implementation, I'll do the same thing. I'll have like exact steps of what I think needs to be done, step 1, 2, 3, and then have it go and actually write the code for me, right? And this saves me a ton of time. Like, the amount of time it would take me to write all of that code manually without any AI, without auto completion, it would literally take me days. Like in this case, when I'm using Cursor, like, it's gonna take, a few minutes to generate all of that. I use Gemini 2.5 Pro. I find that to still be the best for my use cases compared to Claude and others. So I use that, and it takes some time to do thinking and think through all of that. And it's gonna take some time to generate the code. It's like minutes, and what it gives me as the generated output is pretty good. It might not be perfect yet. But I will tell you, by the end of this, when I first started testing end-to-end, I literally had to fix like one thing. There was a dependency conflict. And then it was basically working end-to-end. There were some minor tweaks and minor things I had to fix, but it was basically a fully working feature by the end of this. By the end of all of these prompts and all of the results. So yeah, so what would you call this? Vibe coding? I think I would say this is more like AI assisted coding, which is kind of a formal term and not so fancy. And I think it's probably more correct to call it that. This is not really vibe coding because I am literally reviewing every single line of code that Cursor writes for me. In my entire project, there is not a single line of code in here that I have not reviewed, even though 80 to 90% of the code base was written by Cursor itself, right? So I hope this gives you a better understanding of what I feel is a good way to use AI coding rather than just, vibe coding your entire product and shipping it. If you like the video, please like and subscribe. This is the beginning of my journey in producing YouTube videos to make more of these as I go. Thanks. Bye.